The room was silent, except for the hum of cameras as the press conference unfolded, their lenses hungry for a spectacle. My voice cracked when I said, "This company was built on dreams, and today, those dreams feel shattered." Every headline screamed betrayal, every whisper doubted my name, and the empire I had bled for collapsed before millions of eyes. The bright lights on stage burned my skin, not with warmth but with judgment, each flashbulb a dagger to my pride. My so-called partner sat in the shadows, lips curled in satisfaction, though the world saw only his mask of sympathy. I had trusted him with my vision, my family's sacrifices, my very soul. And now he was the silent executioner of everything I loved. The audience stared, half curious and half cruel, waiting for me to break. My hands trembled, not from fear but from the weight of betrayal pressing down on my chest like iron. In that moment, I realized this was not the end of a chapter, but the violent tearing of a book's heart, and I had no choice but to turn the page or burn with the ashes of my dream. The silence after my words echoed louder than thunder, and in that quiet, I felt the weight of judgment heavier than any verdict. Cameras had captured the crack in my voice, the tremor in my hands, and soon the world would feast on my weakness. My loyal confidant, a friend since childhood, stood at the edge of the stage, eyes burning with quiet solidarity, ready to catch me if I fell. He whispered later, "They can strip away your pride, but not your purpose," though his own hands were clenched in frustration. Every fiber of me wanted to scream, to expose the betrayer seated smugly among the crowd. But I swallowed it down because wars are not won in explosions. They are waged in silence. That night, the headlines would carve me into a villain, a fool and a failure. Yet within me, beneath the broken glass of my reputation, I felt a faint spark that dared to live. Perhaps defeat was not a tomb but a furnace, and I was not yet ash. The city at night did not care for my grief, its neon lights buzzing indifferent above broken glass streets. I walked alone, head heavy, as shadows of skyscrapers mocked the empire I once dreamed of. Betrayal whispered louder with each step, replaying moments when trust had blinded me. The faces of employees who believed in me haunted every passing window reflection, their livelihoods hanging in the balance of my failure. I remembered my father's words, "A man is not measured by victories, but by how he rises after being crushed." Yet rising felt impossible as shame weighed like lead in my veins. I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to keep walking, though the world felt colder, harsher, and unforgiving. Somewhere deep inside, a flicker of resolve stirred, not yet flame, but not yet extinguished either. When I reached home, the silence was unbearable, thick with questions I could not answer. My wife looked at me with eyes that begged for truth, but I had none to give that would heal the wound. "They're saying you knew, that you let this happen," she whispered, her voice trembling with fear. My heart shattered, because I had built this dream not for myself but for her and our children, and now I was dragging them through a storm of shame. I wanted to scream that it was all a lie, that betrayal was the knife, but my lips could only shape silence. The walls of our home seemed to close in, every photo frame of happier times mocking me with what I had lost. Yet in her tearful gaze, I saw both doubt and love, a fragile thread binding us together in the chaos. And I swore silently that I would not let betrayal be the final word in our story. The night stretched long, but dawn eventually crept through the curtains, painting the world in muted gold. Exhaustion pinned me to the couch, yet my mind raced through fragments of betrayal, broken trust, and shattered pride. The loyal confidant arrived early, his steps heavy with concern, his voice steady when he said, "This is not where your story ends." I wanted to believe him, yet every headline screamed otherwise, painting me a fool unfit to lead. He reminded me of the long nights we had once worked together, the sacrifices we had made, and the dream that had always seemed bigger than both of us. "If they took everything, then we build again," he said, his words sharp and defiant, like sparks in the ashes. I looked at him, realizing that while betrayal had broken my trust in others, it had not destroyed loyalty where it mattered. And for the first time since the stage lights burned me alive, I felt that maybe, just maybe, I could rise again. The memory of where it all began returned like an old song, bittersweet yet grounding. I was younger then, standing in a cramped garage with tools scattered across the floor, and dreams stacked higher than the broken shelves. The air smelled of dust, grease, and hope. My loyal confidant was there, his laughter filling the space as we scribbled designs on scraps of cardboard. I told him, "We'll change the world with this, even if no one believes in us," and though my hands trembled, my voice carried conviction. Back then, the world had not yet broken me, nor betrayed me. The city was ruthless, investors were blind, and the odds stacked against us, yet the fire in my chest burned brighter than doubt. Each night we worked until dawn, fueled by instant noodles and impossible faith. When I close my eyes now, I see that garage again, and I wonder, how did a dream so pure become twisted by betrayal? Our vision began not with money, but with defiance. We saw a gap in the world and believed our idea could bridge it. The nights were long, the failures many, but every setback only deepened our resolve. I recall presenting our idea to a small group of students, their eyes lighting up with the same spark that lived within us. For the first time, I realized this was bigger than us. It was a cause. The loyal confidant said, "If we can touch just one life, then we've already won." And I believed him. The world laughed at two kids with nothing but sketches and stubborn faith, but their doubt was fuel. Even in that fragile beginning, I felt the shape of something extraordinary pressing against fate's walls, demanding to be born. The confidant's story intertwined with mine, inseparable threads in a fragile tapestry. We had known each other since childhood, two boys chasing dreams beyond our small town's boundaries. He believed in me when no one else did, and in many ways I leaned on his faith more than my own. He once said, "You're the fire, but I'll be the one who keeps the flame from burning out." And I laughed, not realizing how true those words would become. Together, we balanced chaos and reason, ambition and caution. Even now, standing in the ruins of betrayal, I cannot forget that loyalty. It was his voice that stopped me from giving up when failures piled like stones, and it was his hand that lifted me when exhaustion buried me. Without him, there would have been no beginning. The mentor entered my life at the exact moment doubt nearly won. I had failed pitch after pitch, my voice cracking under the weight of rejection, when he found me outside a conference room, holding back tears. He was a man in his late 50s, eyes sharp with wisdom, voice blunt but strangely comforting. He said, "The world doesn't reward the loudest dreamer, only the one who survives the storm." And those words carved themselves into my soul. He wasn't gentle, but he was honest, and sometimes honesty is the only mercy. Under his guidance, I learned that failure was not an ending but a rehearsal. He forced me to strip away illusions and see the battlefield of business as it was, brutal, unforgiving, but winnable. Without him, I might have walked away, and the world would never have heard my voice. The skeptic's presence was always a thorn in my side, but perhaps one I needed. She was my older sister, cautious where I was reckless, pragmatic where I was idealistic. When I told her of my dream, she shook her head and said, "You're building castles in clouds, and one day they'll fall on you." Her words cut, not because they were cruel, but because they carried the weight of love. She wanted to protect me from heartbreak, yet her doubts often felt like shackles on my wings. Still, every dismissal made me push harder, not to prove her wrong, but to prove myself right. Now, when betrayal has stripped me bare, I wonder if she was not warning me of failure, but of people who would exploit my faith. Perhaps doubt was not my enemy, but a quiet form of love I never understood. The first major crack came not with thunder but with silence. A deal that should have been ours slipped away with no explanation. I sat across from the boardroom table, staring at blank faces that once held excitement, now cold with indifference. Investors who once praised our boldness whispered doubts about our stability, and I knew someone had poisoned their ears. I tried to steady my voice as I said, "This idea will not just succeed, it will redefine the market." But my words fell heavy, unconvincing, as if faith had drained from the room. My confidant's jaw tightened beside me, his eyes scanning for a way to salvage the meeting, but even his presence couldn't cut through the frost. Failure had finally walked into the room, not as an enemy but as an uninvited guest, and it refused to leave. I felt the weight of betrayal stir in the shadows again, though I could not yet see its face. The investor, sharp-eyed and pragmatic, called me into a private meeting the next morning. His tone was clipped, his words carefully chosen. "Numbers don't lie, but people do," he said, sliding a folder across the desk filled with charts highlighting our weaknesses. Each line was a blade, cutting into the fragile armor of my confidence. And he didn't threaten directly, but the implication was clear: step up or lose everything. I nodded, masking the storm inside me, while he leaned back, expression unreadable. His faith in me had not vanished, but it dangled by a thread, ready to snap at the slightest misstep. As I left his office, the weight of expectation pressed harder on my shoulders, turning hope into obligation. The dream was no longer a fire. It was a debt I had to pay in blood, sweat, and sacrifice. Through the growing storm, the silent observer revealed their quiet strength. She stayed late in the office, poring over documents no one else cared to review, her diligence a shield against chaos. I found her one evening, hunched over spreadsheets, eyes tired but unyielding. "You don't have to do this," I told her softly, but she shook her head. "Someone has to make sure this dream doesn't drown in details." Her words humbled me, a reminder that loyalty wasn't always loud. It was steady, often unseen. In her silence, she carried the weight others ignored, and I realized then that the fight for survival wasn't mine alone. She was proof that even in betrayal's shadow, faith still existed, quiet but unbreakable. The antagonist made his move with elegance, disguising malice beneath a polished smile. At a networking gala, he approached me with glass in hand, voice dripping with charm. "Impressive what you've built," he said, though his eyes gleamed with mockery. Around us, powerful figures laughed at his jokes, drawn into his orbit, while my words faltered. He leaned close, whispering, "Be careful who you trust. Sometimes the enemy isn't across the table but beside you." The sting of his insinuation burned hotter than the wine in my glass. He had planted seeds of doubt in fertile soil, and I could feel the room shifting against me. That night his shadow loomed larger, and I knew the battle ahead would not be fought in silence. It would be war disguised as civility. Alone in my office that night, I stared at the city lights, their brilliance mocking the darkness inside me. My reflection on the glass looked like a stranger, weary eyes hollowed by doubt. I whispered aloud, "Am I the fool they think I am?" My confidant entered quietly, placing a hand on my shoulder. "Fools don't fight for dreams," he said firmly, his voice anchoring me against the tide of despair. Yet even as his words warmed me, I could not silence the storm within. The betrayals I could not name gnawed at my spirit, the failures of the day etched into my bones. The city glowed outside, alive with possibility, but in that moment it felt unreachable, like a future I could no longer claim. Still, somewhere in the distance, I sensed the faint hum of resilience, refusing to die. The betrayer first revealed his charm at a moment when I needed strength most. He approached with a smile wide enough to hide 1,000 secrets, his tone dripping with false sincerity. "We're in this together," he said, gripping my hand firmly, his eyes glinting with something I could not name. I wanted to believe him, to hold on to the illusion that loyalty still lived in this company. My confidant warned me, whispering later, "There's something off about him," but I silenced those doubts. How cruelly naive I was, mistaking ambition for trust, mistaking hunger for loyalty. That night, as we celebrated a small success, he raised his glass with us, but I noticed his eyes lingered too long on the numbers, not the people. I ignored the unease that stirred within me, not knowing I was staring into the eyes of my own undoing. The sabotage began quietly, whispers turning into fractures. Emails I never sent appeared in inboxes, contracts delayed without explanation, numbers failing to align as they always had before. I sat in my office, staring at spreadsheets that had once been my pride, now littered with errors I could not explain. My confidant looked at me, confusion in his eyes, and I muttered, "Something isn't right." The betrayer entered moments later, feigning concern, offering solutions that only deepened the cracks. His voice was honey, but his eyes betrayed calculation, each word designed to burrow deeper into trust. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but fear of appearing paranoid held me back. In silence, betrayal spread its roots like ivy, unseen until it was too late. A sudden setback struck, shaking the fragile ground beneath us. A deal we had nurtured for months collapsed in a single phone call, the client citing concerns about stability. My chest tightened as I placed the phone down, the words echoing like a verdict. Around me, employees shuffled nervously, their faith slipping like sand through their fingers. My confidant slammed his fist on the table, anger flaring, but I sat frozen, unable to move. The betrayer stepped forward, hand on my shoulder, his expression one of perfect sympathy. "We'll find another way," he said softly, though I could feel the poison of triumph beneath his tone. I swallowed the bile of despair, blind to the fact that the knife had already been twisted. The mentor saw through what I refused to admit. Over coffee in a quiet corner cafe, his sharp eyes studied me like a surgeon diagnosing a wound. "You're bleeding trust," he said bluntly, his voice low but firm. I tried to argue, insisting everything was under control, but he silenced me with a single look. Loyalty is tested when stakes are highest, and someone close to you is already failing that test. His words sliced through denial, exposing the truth I buried. I left the cafe shaken, clutching his advice like a lifeline, yet still unwilling to confront the storm brewing within my own walls. Fear is a strange prison. Even with the key in hand, I could not force myself to unlock the truth. The emotional blow came sudden and cruel. An important investor pulled out without warning, citing lack of confidence in leadership. My confidant's face turned pale, his fists clenched as he muttered, "This isn't coincidence." I stood frozen, my chest hollow, knowing deep down he was right. Betrayal was no longer a shadow, it was a storm tearing through everything I had built. The employees avoided my gaze, whispers filling the silence of the office. I felt stripped, humiliated, and powerless. That night, as I stared at the city's glow, the words of the antagonist echoed in my head, "Be careful who you trust." And for the first time, I realized trust itself had become the weapon used against me. The truth arrived not in whispers, but in a brutal document placed on my desk. Financial records exposing hidden transfers, manipulated contracts, and a signature that was not mine but eerily familiar. My stomach dropped as I realized who it belonged to. The betrayer had been siphoning funds, carving our lifeline into his private escape. My confidant burst into the office, his voice trembling with rage. "It was him, wasn't it?" I'd not answer, because silence was confirmation enough. Every doubt, every unease, every shadow I had ignored, stood before me like a roaring storm. The walls felt smaller, the air heavier, as betrayal revealed itself not as suspicion but as fact. My heart thundered in my chest, not from fear but from the searing pain of trust, shattered beyond repair. I confronted him in the boardroom, my voice shaking but sharp. "You were supposed to build this with me, not bury me." The betrayer leaned back in his chair, calm as a man with nothing to lose. "You dream too big," he said smoothly, "and I'm not sinking with your fantasy." My confidant surged forward, fury etched into every muscle, but I held him back, because anger would not win this battle. My hands trembled as I realized he had not only betrayed me, but had aligned himself with the antagonist. The pieces clicked together like cruel puzzle fragments, forming an image I did not want to see. Betrayal was not an accident. It was a strategy. News traveled fast. Within hours, the investor called me into his office, his expression grim. He held up the reports, his voice low but sharp. "Do you realize what this does to your credibility?" I tried to explain, my words tripping over the truth, but he cut me off. The market doesn't care who forged signatures, it only cares that your house is burning. His gaze softened slightly as he added, "Decide quickly whether you'll rebuild or let it collapse." I left the office with my chest hollow, my legs heavy. The betrayal had not only robbed me of trust, but had threatened the very future of everything we had built. And yet, in the investor's warning, I heard a challenge: prove them wrong or be erased. That night, the moral compass came to see me. He placed a hand on my shoulder, his voice steady, his tone like a lighthouse in storm. "You have two choices: fight with integrity, or let anger turn you into them." I shook my head, exhausted, whispering, "They've taken everything." His reply was firm, almost harsh. "Not everything. You still have your name, your vision, and your soul. Don't throw those away chasing vengeance." His words pressed deep, forcing me to confront the razor's edge between justice and rage. In Betrayal's aftermath, the easiest path was destruction, but his reminder lit a fragile flame inside me. I realized I could still fight, but I had to choose the ground on which to stand. The revelation crashed fully when I returned to the office. The betrayer stood openly with the antagonist, their alliance no longer hidden but paraded like a trophy. Employees watched in stunned silence as the two shook hands, sealing the deal that would gut my company. My confidant whispered, "It's over," but I shook my head even as despair wrapped its claws around me. I felt the floor collapse beneath me, yet somewhere in that free fall, a strange clarity emerged. Betrayal had ripped away illusions, leaving only the raw truth. This was not just about survival, it was war. And though I was broken, I was not finished. In that moment, I swore silently that the story would not end with their victory. Not while I still had breath. I stood before the mirror, the same man yet not the same soul. The weight of betrayal still clung to me, but beneath it burned a fire that refused to die. My confidant entered quietly, his voice steady. "They think you're broken," he said, "but that's your weapon. They've underestimated you." I met his gaze, nodding slowly, the fear inside me crystallizing into resolve. For too long, I had let others dictate the story, but tonight, that ended. I whispered, "This is no longer about survival. This is about proving that faith can outlast betrayal." The storm outside rattled the windows, thunder echoing my heartbeat, as I prepared for the confrontation that would decide everything. The confrontation with the betrayer came first. I entered the office where he waited, smugness painted across his face. He leaned back, arms folded, and said, "You should have known dreams don't survive in this world." My voice was low but sharp as I replied, "Neither do traitors." For a moment, silence crackled like electricity between us, the kind that precedes a storm. He smirked, but the confidence in his eyes flickered when he saw I wasn't broken. "You've already lost," he sneered. I leaned closer, my voice steady. "No, I've only begun to fight." The room seemed to shrink around us, the weight of years of trust and betrayal colliding in one furious heartbeat. The investor demanded a final meeting, a chance to prove whether my vision was still worth saving. The room was heavy with silence as I presented, every word trembling yet carved with conviction. I spoke not of profits, but of resilience, of people who believed when the world mocked us, of loyalty that refused to die. The investor studied me with cold eyes, his fingers drumming against the desk. For a long moment I thought he would dismiss me. Then he leaned forward, voice measured. "You've been dragged through hell, and yet you stand. That matters more than numbers." It was not a victory yet, but it was a spark, a chance to breathe life into the ashes. The antagonist struck hardest at the peak of my weakness. He called me into a negotiation, the room filled with his allies, their smiles sharp as knives. He welcomed me with mock courtesy, saying, "This is where your dream finally dies." My heart pounded, but I steadied my voice. "Or where yours begins to unravel." The clash was not of fists but of words, of strategy sharpened into weapons. He pressed with arrogance, I countered with truth. Every second was a battle, every phrase a knife edge. Sweat slicked my palms, yet clarity carried me through. In that room, for the first time, I felt the balance tilt, not against me, but towards something stronger. The climax came not in victory but in choice. The documents lay before me, proof of their corruption, enough to destroy them publicly. My confidant urged, "End them now," his voice fierce with loyalty. But the moral compass warning echoed in my mind, "Don't become what you hate." My hands trembled as I hovered over the evidence, the weight of decision heavier than any betrayal. Revenge promised satisfaction, but integrity promised redemption. At last I raised my head, voice unshaken. We win not by burning everything, but by showing we can't be broken. The betrayer's smirk faltered, the antagonist's composure cracked. In that moment I chose not destruction but defiance, and the story shifted forever. The dust settled slowly, like ash after a fire. My company was battered, my name scarred, yet I still stood. The betrayer was gone, the antagonist's empire shaken, but victory did not taste sweet. It tasted like survival. Employees gathered in the office, uncertain yet hopeful, their eyes turning to me not for perfection, but for resilience. I spoke quietly. "We are not what they tried to break. We are what refused to stay broken." My words were met with silence at first, then a fragile ripple of applause, not for success but for endurance. In that moment, I understood. Redemption was not about reclaiming the old dream, it was about building a new one from the wreckage. The loyal confidant stepped forward, no longer just my anchor, but my equal. He looked at me with a mix of pride and determination, saying, "It's time I stop standing behind you and start standing beside you." For years I had leaned on his strength without fully seeing it. Now, in the ruins, his leadership shone brighter than ever. Together, we mapped new plans, scribbling not on pristine documents but on scraps of paper, just as we had in the beginning. I realized that dreams do not die, they evolve. And this time, it would not be mine alone, but ours. The flame that betrayal tried to extinguish now burned brighter, fueled by loyalty, reborn as shared leadership. In the corner, the silent observer finally found her voice. She had worked quietly, unnoticed, yet her dedication had saved us countless times. Now, with gentle courage, she spoke up. "I've seen what this company can become, and I want to help lead it there." Her words silenced the room, not with shock but with respect. I realized she had always been more than support. She had been strength in silence. My confidant nodded, pride flickering in his eyes, and I smiled, knowing this was no longer my fight alone. Every story needs heroes, but greatness comes when everyone carries the dream together. For the first time, I saw her not as a quiet presence, but as a voice shaping the future. At home my wife greeted me not with doubt, but with a tired smile. She had endured the storm, carried the weight of whispers, and yet she still stood with me. I held her hand, whispering, "I almost lost everything." She pressed her forehead to mine and said softly, "You didn't lose me. And that's everything." Tears blurred my vision, not of defeat but of gratitude. Betrayal had stolen so much, but it had not broken love, and that truth grounded me more than any business victory could. Redemption was not only found in boardrooms or headlines, but in the quiet moments where love survived the fire. And in her embrace, I felt whole again. The final scene belonged not to betrayal but to resilience. I stood once again on a stage, not under the harsh glare of judgment, but under the softer light of renewal. My voice carried calm strength as I said, "They tried to bury us in lies, but they forgot we were seeds." The audience, no longer predators but believers, rose in applause, their faces alive with faith. I looked out, not with pride but with gratitude, knowing that the scars I carried were not weaknesses, but proof of survival. This was not the end of a dream, it was the rebirth of one stronger, wiser and unbreakable. The lights dimmed, the applause echoed, and I felt peace. Betrayal had almost destroyed me, but in the end, it had built me into something greater.